this episode, Menachem Alter and I discuss the Times of Israel article, How Much Does Orthodox Life Cost in America? Increasingly, More Than Families Can Afford by Zev Stubb. We'll link in the show notes. Hope you enjoy the conversation. So the main point of the article, not shockingly, is Orthodox middle-class life in North America is financially unsustainable for many families, right? Okay, that's the point. Three major drivers of this unsustainability are tuition for Jewish day schools, yeshiva Jewish day school tuition, housing in real estate in Orthodox communities, and the impacts of just having a large family, which covers, education, food, camp, and all the expenses that just go along with children. Tuition's the single largest expense that families face. You have to live within a geographic area of a shul, so that creates this supply and demand dynamic where housing prices are higher. And many households that would appear affluent on paper are actually struggling to make it. The article contests or contends or makes the point, that's probably better, that this generation is going to be worse off, stands to be worse off than the prior generations. There's a risk that people will opt out of Orthodox life as a result. And here are the proposals for addressing it, which I assume we'll get to. More tuition assistance, easier said than done. Increasing financial literacy and financial planning for families. Creating more affordable Orthodox communities. I think that's referring to engineering more affordable, but going to places where you can afford to buy, and considering Aliyah, right? Just leaving and opting out of the problem. And we'll talk about that because I'm not sure that that's really a solution.
No, it is, if that is an option for you. But it's not it's a solution it's a personal solution. It's not a group community solution.
Yes, for sure it's not a group community solution. I would argue that having made Aliyah, right, and failed at it, not for financial reasons, to be fair, I would argue that it's not really a solution because I get into this conversation with people all the time. People who grew up here in Toronto have this feeling like living in New York is so much better, right? The taxes are lower, everything's better, right? And Naftali and I have always talked about this. Like, if you actually run the numbers, I'm not sure it works out that way. Because yes, your taxes are much higher here, right? But you're also getting healthcare, and people in the States are paying $25,000 a year in healthcare premiums. So that's a huge chunk that goes on top of that. Cars are, there used to be cars where you could get all these deals like wheels to lease and whatever. That's all done. Like the inventory deals are done. So cars are basically the same. Food's expensive everywhere. Real estate in Toronto is expensive, but real estate in New York is super expensive. And in New Jersey, you have the other problem where you're paying a ton because your property taxes are so high. So you're not actually even investing that money, right? You're just. So I'm not sure.
I think once you tally the numbers.
Yeah. Like Israel also. It's like, yeah, you can live in Israel.
Hang on, it depends why you're going to Israel. So okay. We have a lot of mutual friends that have made Aliyah in the last number of years. And this isn't a scientific fact. This is something that just from conversations, I think those that went because they wanted a different lifestyle, they were willing to embrace the Israeli lifestyle and live that way, financially are more successful than those that said, I need to get away, but I still want the comforts of my North American life.
I agree with that. I'll add two things to it. One is the double benefit if you embrace the Israeli lifestyle is the materialism in Israeli society is much lower. So to me the example of that is clothing. Like your kids will not have the same desires for designer clothes, the best clothes, all of that stuff in an Israeli reality. So that's part of it.
Which if I can jump in, that leads to part of the conversations we have of the goalposts, right? Human beings want to live within the goalposts. Those goalposts are manufactured by communities, people, leaders, whatever it is.
Right.
If you're someone who just wants to call it fit in, and you pick yourself up and you go to a community where those goalposts are much different or more attainable, ultimately you will be happy. And by the
So
way,
I think that's why Israel actually ranks, these like happiness surveys where Israel ranks in, I don't know what it is, top 10, top 5, whatever, like one of the happiest countries, which shouldn't be that way, right? Given the stress and pressure of living there and miluim and all these other things. And even post October 7th, these numbers are still holding. I think most of the happiness research shows that actually the greatest indicator, impactor of our happiness is how we see ourselves compared to those around us, right? Which is why you can have people in like the slums of India who are like super happy because everyone around them is in the same situation. And I think Israel does, in more of a socialist sort of way, create kind of this perception of parity. There's not a lot of social pressures within communities. Also, Israel has the advantage of having these little bubbles. Like you live in your yishuv, you live in your moshav, everyone's kind of the same as you. You don't have a lot of the comparison. I will say this though, for North Americans making aliyah, is for a lot of families, the sacrifices is, do you want to fly home every year and spend time with your family back here? Because if you do, add another 10 grand, right. to your annual expenses. Do you want to go out to eat at restaurants all the time? Because food in Israel is super expensive.
Right. So, and that's if you want to live like an American, but I want to reference the article.
Yeah.
They talked about retention of kids staying from. It comes down to happiness. If kids are happy, they will have a better chance of staying from. If kids are unhappy or families are unhappy, they won't.
Yeah, so it's funny. I just talked about this with Yosef Kurtz on my last podcast. But actually, just on the from point, going to Israel doesn't work, right? Meaning more kids who go to Israel, unless you're in the Haredi community, right, which is its own animal in Israel and different from the yeshivish community here. But if you're in sort of the broadly modern Orthodox community, the chance of your kids staying from in Israel is actually lower than here because of what it means to be not from in Israel versus here, where it's like Israel's just a lifestyle choice, and here it's like opting out of your community entirely. Yeah. So let's talk about the big drivers though, right? Let's talk about tuition. Let's talk about the cost of living, life cycle events, all the keeping up with the Joneses, all of that stuff, and let's talk about real estate. What do you want to start with?
Okay, so I want to compartmentalize some of those things.
Sure.
There are costs and issues that we discuss that we have control over and that we don't have control over, okay? Do we have control over tuition? Yes, because you can get a committee of people to do research, to find models, to figure it out, but I'm talking about individually. We don't have control on real estate and we don't have control on tuition. We do have control on many other of those aspects, simchas, vacations, lifestyle, clothing, and all those decisions.
I disagree on tuition. Okay. I think we have control on tuition. I think that we, and again, I think we have to, I want to be careful about this because if you ask me what bothers me about tuition, it's not the cost. And look, I'm one of those families that pays full tuition and it hurts, right? Like I don't have a choice, right? Like I don't qualify for subsidies, but I'm like right at that line, right? And it doesn't bother me to pay it. What bothers me is the product I get for what I pay. That's what bothers me. And as an educator, that really bothers me.
Do you think that's a Toronto thing or a North American thing?
I think it's worse in Toronto. In fairness, like I think I have a very different value set in terms of what I'm looking for from a school, which is a high quality learning, cognitive skill development experience for my children, right? I look for my students too.
You really want your kids to get an education in school?
That's right. Whereas I don't think communally that's the value, at least, that's not the expressed or lived value. I think people say, of course I want that, but in the end, feeling good and whatever hashkafa your school has, those seem to be bigger drivers. So that's a piece of it, but I think it's worse here. Meaning I think there is I think in North America on the East Coast in particular, there's a competitiveness and a high value on the quality of education. And we could argue whether the things schools on the East Coast focus on are the most important things to focus on educationally, but they at least are educational values. And that competitiveness creates a higher quality product. Like I think if you take any of our schools that claim to care about the quality of education, right? Nitivot, Eitz Chaim, whatever, and you put them up against their New York counterpart, like the same hashkafic value in New York, the quality of the education in New York will be significantly better. And that's part of market forces and just competition, but it's also just a value set of the community. Toronto's much more Midwestern in its values. So that's that. So yeah, going back, I pay the tuition. I don't love the product. But as an educator, right, I think there are many ways we can completely revamp how education works such that we get a higher quality product, possibly for a lower price, or certainly it could be for a lower price. It doesn't have to be. School budgets in every school I've ever encountered are just these giant black boxes, right? Like I don't mean to suggest, and I know, especially post Madoff, there's so much work that's been done to professionalize boards and to make sure there's high standards of accountability. And that's true. Those are all there. It's very hard to steal money or to misallocate resources within a school because, most good schools have put in professional checks and balances. But that doesn't actually tell the story, right? Because you can look at a budget and, you can have all these controls where, 3 people have to sign checks and every money that moves has to be, viewed. But then you have a budget item that just says teacher salaries, right? And what does that mean? What is that money actually going towards, right? Administrator salaries. What are those roles that administrators have? Half the teachers in the school have portfolios of administrative work that they also do. That's just captured in a budget. No Jewish school I know knows how much they spend on math, how much they spend on Gemara, how much they spend on skill building, right? There are no value-based budgets that say, what are we actually investing in these programs? I'll give you the perfect just example that I think a lot of people can resonate with. We spend a lot of money on administrators in schools. I was an administrator, right? A good chunk of an administrator's day is spent fixing the problems that occurred in the classroom between the teacher and the student. The primary point of learning, that is the interaction between the teacher and the student, something went wrong there, and then the administrator has to come in. And most often, the administrator is not actually fixing the problem. What the administrator is doing is trying to put a nice bow on top of the problem, use professional terminology with the parents, engage in a sort of quality customer service oriented interaction that helps the parent feel good, right? And at best, minimizes the problem or helps mitigate the impacts of the problem. If you were any business or organization, right, and you had to hire a middleman, right, to try and smooth over the problem that was getting created at the core place, that would be a poor move. You should address the problem at the core place, right? The problems that exist in school that administrators are spending a lot of their time addressing are problems between the teacher and the student, are problems that exist in the classroom. So my question is, if you fix the classroom, which would require money, because part of the reason you don't get high quality teachers is because you don't pay high quality prices for teachers. But if you address the problem in the classroom, how necessary would all the expensive administrators be? So you're paying all these teachers, and then you have to pay a level of middle management to essentially smooth over all the problems that are happening in the classroom, right? And part of the reason for that, as I've said many times, is because the classroom is a failing endeavor to start with. So fix your problems where they're at. And then I can't guarantee, because I've never seen this experiment tried, I can't guarantee it's going to result in a lower cost, but it'll certainly result in a much more transparent situation where you know what you're spending on and you know what product you're getting.
Yeah, I agree. This is definitely not my area of expertise. That being said, I did dabble in it a number of years ago.
Right, I know.
Your brother-in-law and I did a little bit of research. Took some time. We spoke to the UJA. We were dealing with Eitz Chaim at the time, and we took a trip to New York.
Right.
And we went to a number of places, one of them being Halb, one of them being Yeshivat Atid. Yeshivat Atid actually started with this whole blended learning, but so Halb didn't dive into blended learning for financial reasons. Yeshivat Atid did.
Yeah, Yeshivat Atid still boasts, I think, that they are the only school that has affordability in their mission statement.
Right.
I mean, their goal is
right, and that was their goal.
Yeah.
And at the time, I can't remember the administrator that we walked around. And again, there was a lot of pride and there was a lot of excitement around it. And we saw that at Halb also. His line was, when we raised money, and it was big money to start, it was money to build from the ground up. Most schools today that are collecting funds are just to cover a deep hole that's just going to get deeper and deeper and
Yep.
deeper and deeper.
Chasing good money after bad.
So I don't want to, the truth of the matter is it's not my area of expertise. I don't want to dump on schools. There's a lot of, effort and time and community work that goes into it. Ultimately, is there a solution for making education cheaper? I think the answer lies in every aspect that we'll talk about or is discussed, which is you have to strip things down to the bare minimum and then work your way up.
That's
and
exactly
I don't
correct, yeah.
think in schools, from what I've seen, that they're willing to do that this point or ever.
But that to me is exactly the point. It's that in the end, we know we have a broken system from its own perspective, from the learning perspective, meaning it's not successful. Most students are not successful in school by our own measures because we issue assessments and report cards, and only 20% or so of students are fully successful. So most students are not successful. The system is clearly broken. Fix the system, and then you will reveal what you can do in terms of costs. And we haven't taken that approach. The approach we've taken is, the costs are built in, right? We can't control the costs. They're what they are. We have to have this school and we have to spend this money. And so now how can we raise, subsidize, create a system? So that's a good segue. So one of the things the article brings up, which I wanted to discuss with you, is the article brings up full paying parents subsidizing the tuition for those who can't afford it, right? This is actually, I was shocked to learn this a number of years ago, but this is very common in the US. Meaning it is very common in the US for schools to charge a premium, right, above, let's say, the cost of educating a child. And the cost of educating a child in its simplest calculation is the total operating budget of the school divided by the number of students in the school, right? It is very common in the States for the school to charge maybe even $10,000 on top of that, right? So that it can cover the subsidies that it provides for families who can't afford. And this happens in LA, I know for a fact. I know it happens in some schools in New York. And the thinking behind this is, well, full paying parents, if I can't get them in the fundraising loop, right? Full paying parents basically can afford this. So we can do it. And if you can't afford it, then you should apply for subsidies. Toronto schools, by and large, don't do that, in my understanding. Toronto schools do the calculation of operating budget divided by the total number of students, and then whatever subsidies they provide is on top of that. What do you think of that?
So this speaks to community, and this is one of the issues that are constantly talked about in other communities. The rich live with the rich, the poor live with the poor.
Right.
No one's Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. That's community life. That's Jewish life, and that really speaks to how we live on the outside and what we do. I definitely feel that community should support those that can afford. Now, can the system become more efficient? Can we try and save tuition dollars? It's a separate question. Once you lower the cost,
the community should support, right? Does that mean people should be forced to pay?
No.
Is it a tax?
No.
Okay.
Because that leads to resentment, and that leads to a system that ultimately isn't going to work, and that leads to unhappiness, which leads to the issue of, and the reason, I think one of the reasons that drove me to start researching affordability and all these things is just speaking to people and having conversations. I don't know if the word unhappy is the right word, but that ultimately is the sense and feeling that I'm getting from people. They're stressed, they're unhappy, they're resentful towards something or another. They can't wait to leave Toronto, go on vacation. I just find people aren't content. I maybe include myself in that also. And you want to live in a city and around people who are content. It's one of those conversations where, and I think they referenced it in the article, the percentage of, especially from families, modern Orthodox or from, who would consider not sending their children to private school just to save money was very low. I think it was 1% or 7%. So it's really not an option for people to say, I'm going to run away.
Okay, but then isn't this in effect a tax, right? So I'm an economics teacher, right? One of the things I teach my students is about inelastic demand, right? The classic example of that is insulin for a diabetic, right? So an inelastic demand curve basically looks like almost like an up and down line on the graph. No matter where the price goes, right, person's going to pay, right? Because otherwise they wouldn't survive. So and this gets to I think the core of our conversation, if these social dynamics of living in an Orthodox community make the demand for Jewish education essentially an inelastic demand, then of course you are going to have price inefficiencies. Of course you are going to have price gouging. These are just economic realities, right? Because the system is designed in such a way that effectively your tuition is a tax, right? It's not an optional charge. As at Kiddush, we were just talking about this, and I said, what's your most frustrating expense? And he said, well, it has to be tuition. I said, why? He said, because I'm not a customer, right? I'm not, like, everything else you spend on, you're actually a customer, right? Like, my car got stolen, right? And I'm negotiating with the insurance company.
Simon told me.
And you spoke to Simon?
I was there this week.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I'm actually a customer, right? Like, I actually have some leverage. In school, I am not a customer. The only people who are customers in a school are the donors to the school, right? Full paying tuition parents are not customers. Subsidized tuition parents are not customers, right? It is effectively a tax. So when you talk about the resentment, like, oh, we shouldn't make people pay because they'll feel resentment, the entire system makes people pay.
Which leads me to, I believe the entire system needs to be revamped. And as you said earlier on, just to put these Band-Aids or these bows or these buzzwords of individualized learning and all these other things that we see, and I'm not knocking what the schools do and the time and the effort and the passion that our teachers and our rebbeim and our administrators have. I'm not here to knock them personally. I just think the system is broken. I'm not educated enough to speak to the specifics of it. I just know, as someone who's gone through school, has kids in school, been on a board of a school, the system is broken. And there's really two options. Either fix it, and fixing it means stripping it down to the bare bones and the core and rebuilding it, which we don't see in many communities and definitely not in Toronto, or just continuing down this road of, because then it's just conversation.
What are the chances, right? Given that we're just having a conversation.
Yeah.
What are the chances, right? Like, or let me make the question even a little stronger. What other economic reality, because that's basically what this is. This is a market-based reality, right? What other economic reality actually gets fixed because of the goodwill of people who just want to fix it versus an economic reality getting fixed when the incentives fundamentally change, right? So how do you fix, if the incentives are still there, that everyone wants in on the Orthodox community and nobody's defecting and nobody's actually leaving, meaning you want to fix this problem, have 20 families leave Orthodoxy, right, in your community, and you will suddenly find solutions to the problem. But we're here, and I mean in the collective, because there's a lot that's been said about this in the last year or so. Right, and the what's his name guy, the Living L'Chaim Kosher Money guy, right?
Yes.
Like they've been,
Langer.
They've been doing this, and to their credit, they've been talking about this a lot.
Yep.
But in what sense is goodwill actually going to change anything?
It's not.
Right.
So, going back to an earlier comment, there are things we have control over and things we don't.
Okay. So let's talk about this.
We can't even change the things that we have control over. And this is society in general. This isn't a knock on a specific group or people. It's all of us. We lack discipline, okay? And discipline means doing things you know that are right, that are hard to do. Mm-hmm. And we could just see it with sitting around shul with people and saying, tell me about the wedding you just made. Yeah. Tell me about the simcha you just made. And I want to pick on simchas because out of every other topic, camps, homes, vacations, simchas is one that the vast majority of people that I speak to say, I do not see any value in it. Right. It was stressful. Right. And I only do it because other people do it. So if we can't be disciplined enough to be able to wake up one day and say, we're going to stop this with simchas, how are we going to do that with something so much more complex and complicated like real estate and homes?
Right. So what drives? What are the incentive structures? Let's get to the core. What are the incentive structures that drive? Because I'm about to make a bar mitzvah. First simcha I have to make. I have zero desire to do any of this.
Right.
And interestingly, my son doesn't either. At least he hasn't expressed it. It's not like he's coming in and saying, I want a bar mitzvah that does this or I want a bar mitzvah that does that, right? But what are the incentive structures underlying making a simcha that create this problem?
Social media.
Okay.
And there's a lot there, but everyone, as I said, wants to fit within the goalposts, okay? When we were growing up, the goalpost was your block, your shul,
right?
Maybe your community.
Right.
Today, the goalposts are worldwide. And because everyone wants to be unique and everyone wants to fit in and everyone wants to show, here is my simcha, and that's the world we live in, you as a Bal Simcha and your kid as the Bar Mitzvah boy don't want to be different. And if the norms in Toronto, in my community, is to spend $40,000 on a Simcha, you may spend 50, 60 to be a little bit different. You may spend 30 to try and save a little, but ultimately you've spent 10 times, 5 times, 8 times as much as you actually wanted to spend just because of social pressure and norms.
Yeah.
COVID. How many people? And this is the how many people? Everyone. That was a beautiful look. I made a bar mitzvah during COVID. Right. It cost me cost me I think $7,000, right. And I think I was left with $1,000 of booze at the end because I bought too much. We did it in our backyard, and everyone else making simchas during that time, weddings, bar mitzvahs, and that's where the mask comes off. So let's leave every other topic aside. It is very
in Toronto, the mask didn't come off.
Right, right. But it's clear and it's evident that most people do not see value in it. You know, you want to talk about weddings, and I know I'm someone who doesn't like to leave my home. But take a wedding of 400 people. Yeah. And this isn't a knock on any simcha. Yeah. It's every simcha. If you are not a family member or a close friend that you speak to every week, everyone else that you've invited is sitting home at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday evening going,
why am I going?
Put on a suit, drive to Brent. Yeah. So for what?
Look,
why are we doing this?
My cousin's kid got married at the wedding we were talking about, 150 people there. And you know what? He had 15 good friends. They brought the ruach. Right? My cousin and his wife invited a handful of friends from their community, meaning the people they're really friendly with, right? And I don't know what the other side did, and then there was family, and there was a big family. But even a big family, if you're just inviting a handful of friends, like, okay, so your family's 60, 70 people. You've done it. You've settled now. But what's the flip side? What does my cousin not have, right? That I have and that you have and that the rest of us have. My cousin isn't really a shul goer, right? And when you go to shul every Shabbos, you have this tension. You have these people who you're not really close to in any deep way, but on the surface you pretend to be close to, meaning you've shared Shabbos meals together, you've invited each other over to your houses, right? Like, are they friends? Like, in the sense of like, people like you're calling when you're in the hospital and you need help, like whatever it is. No, they're not that close. But you have this in-between reality that we've created where you feel obligation and where those people, even if they were sitting at home being like, oh, I got to go to this wedding, would feel insulted if they weren't invited.
Because that's the norms.
Right.
And you go to Eretz Yisrael, and you go to the weddings. I have cousins all across the country, and most of those weddings are jeans with the Blundstones and a white untucked shirt, and they're spending $10,000 on an amazing, beautiful wedding. And that leads to another conversation where people say, well, where do you cut? And they're not wrong, because the average wedding today, and let's call it from engagement to final Sheva Brachas, each side is spending $80,000 to $150,000. Mm-hmm. Realistically, those are the numbers. And when I have conversations with people and they say, okay, great, you're going to squeeze the lemon and you're going to get it down to $60,000 per side. This is where stripping it down to the core applies again. What is a wedding? It's 10 men, a rabbi, and a canopy. That's what a wedding is.
Yep.
Now, there is something in between 10 men, a rabbi, and a canopy, and $120,000
Do you need a minion?
for the Sheva brachas.
Oh, for the Sheva brachos, right. Right. I think.
Yeah, I think you need a minion. You need a minion, right?
Good yeshiva
Good yeshiva
education.
education. My brother-in-law Yoni got married in the backyard.
Right.
And he pissed off a lot of people. He offended a lot of people.
Right.
Ultimately, it was the most beautiful wedding. And it's funny. That is the memorable wedding that we talk about within the family.
Right.
Right? That is what people remember. So,
right. Rachel and I did a small wedding, by the way, and it was awesome. We had and small for us was like 200 people, but it was still small, and it was great.
So let me tell you,
we cared about everyone who was there.
Right. Let me tell you what we're up against. We're up against a society, this is all of us, this is the world we live in, where we lack discipline. We know what's right, we know what we want, we know what would make us happy, yet we don't have the tools how to overcome that. And that speaks to part of, you and I are part of a group that is trying to push some of these conversations forward. And that really is the conversation. People aren't going to change overnight. People aren't going to do it by themselves. And we may not be able to change anything in the grander picture.
You had an awesome analogy, which I really love, which is 10 years ago, nobody talked about mental health. Right. And every time, and everyone struggled with it. We all grew up with friends who struggled with it. We knew people who struggled with it. We knew people who struggled with it even before we knew what it was, but they were struggling with it. And now it's totally normal. Meaning I can talk about my own anxiety. I can talk about my children's anxiety. We can all talk about mental health in a normal way because the conversation came to a place where it was public. This is what you want to do for Fanny. You want someone to say, I'm not doing the chasna because it's just too expensive, or it's a stupid expense. I don't want to spend that money on it. And you want to make that normal, right? Such that the conversation can just happen and people can say that, and everyone sitting around the table could be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And that's what we found. Listen, our group needs to grow, but the feedback we're getting from the group is every time we meet, and there's a lot of conversation, we need to start doing more concrete actions, but the conversation is a big piece of it, that it is therapeutic for people. So,
okay, wait, can I challenge the analogy now? Okay, right. So this is where I think the analogy fails, because mental health is actually something that impacts everyone, right? It's not like there's one class of people who have no mental health challenges, right? And there's another class of people that have mental health challenges. When it comes to money, right? Wealthy people are going to do what wealthy people do. They're going to make the crazy weddings. And again, the whole entire tone of our conversation is actually, this isn't a problem for the community to solve, right? This goes back to the, communal responsibility. If I'm a philanthropist, right, and I'm getting hit up from every corner for every need, and some of those needs are real, people who are genuinely suffering, who have nothing, right? And then you're telling me you're making, $350,000 a year, and it's hard for you because you have to spend $50,000 on a wedding, or $50,000 on a bar mitzvah, $100,000 on a wedding, right? Like, I'm going to say to you, just grow up and make a responsible decision. You don't like that I made money. You don't like that I'm rich. All right. But in the end of the day, you're in your position. I'm in my position. You make the decisions you have to make in your position. And I tend to agree with that idea. But the problem is that if all these social pressures are there, you can't you could break the mental health narrative, because the rich person also had a kid suffering from depression, and also had a kid suffering from anxiety. And so when you sat around the table as a whole community, rich, middle class, poor, you were all talking about the same mental health problem. It's not true with money.
So I agree with you. Last week I listened to, David Bashashkin had a podcast where it was a debate. Are simchas out of control or not? Or it was based on that. And he did preface it by saying that the nay was very hard to find, because it isn't a popular position to take, to say that our simchas are not out of control.
Go for it.
But one of the things and I forget her name, what she said was, basically what you're saying.
They're only out of control if you made the decision to make them out of control.
Her analogy was schools, right? Parent comes to the school or the teacher and says, everyone's bringing a certain toy or wearing a certain thing. Can you ask those parents not to send their kids with those things? Mm-hmm. And the answer is, you're the parent. And it's the same here, but here's where we're at. We're in a place where the vast majority of people just don't have those tools. So is the answer that you gave the right answer? Grow up, you're 50 years old. If you don't have the money and you spend it, it's your problem. 100%, you can't argue that. But when you look around and the majority of people, from whatever the reasons are and whatever the excuses are, cannot be disciplined, that's when having conversations, bringing this to light and helping people and giving people the tools. Look, one of the things we talk about is what we're trying to do is not takanas or telling people how to spend their money or where to spend their money. It's conversation and tools. It's financial literacy, and then coming up with ideas, which is already happening in the city, of how to make.
Right. So I would say that the demographic that I think this works for the most is actually not the people who can't afford it, who make poor decisions, right? Because those people that are making poor decisions, they're probably going to continue. Meaning, if I'm putting myself in massive amounts of debt to make a $150,000 wedding, right? You're going to make that decision regardless, because your value set has it that the appearance of this is so much more important to me than my own financial security at this moment, that I'm making that value trade-off. I think the demographic that what you're suggesting works for the most is the demographic that can technically afford it, but doesn't want to spend it. Meaning the demographic that wants the out. And I see this because there are really two groups of people. There are people who, will say, oh yeah, it's so silly, it's so silly, it's so silly. But at the end of the day, if that's what their shefala wants, if that's what their kid wants, they're not going to say no. And they don't want to be seen as the person who doesn't have the nicer wedding, right? They don't want to present themselves that way to their child. They don't want to present themselves that way to the community. There are other people, though, who actually don't care how they present themselves to the community, but they just need a little sense of belonging, right? A little sense that I'm not crazy. They want to be able to sit around the table and not have awkward conversations about the fact that they did something different, right? That's your target right there.
Our target is everybody.
Okay.
Those that can afford want to feel normal. I've heard justification, and that's maybe a strong word, a justification, but I've heard people tell me there's very little that I give into my kids, but when it comes to this monumental day of their bar mitzvah, I want to make them feel normal. Then you have the middle class who say, I have this is how people perceive me. This is who I am in the community. How am I going to give my kid less? And then what it does is it triggers those that feel they need to show that they have more to just up their simchas. And that's where we are today, where it's not the richest problem or the middle class problem or the poor problem. It's a societal problem. I have a buddy who is involved in community, and he constantly tells me the money that is not being paid on high-end simchas, the debt that people go into who we perceive to have money. Layla came up with a great line, and I think I'm going to use it more often. Even the Joneses can no longer keep up with the Joneses.
Let me ask you a question. Paint for me a realistic scenario where a person who has that value set changes. Like, is that person genuinely dying inside to change? Right? You talk about people being 50, right? It's hard to change when you're older, right? Yeah. Like, is that person really dying to change? They're just dying for the out, the person who gives them the permission to not have to spend. Or is that person so verkrumt in his values, right? So down the road of just not seeing things in a way that would allow them to exist in a happier, healthier way. Paint for me the picture how we get from point A to point B in this.
People are good, right?
Well, that might be where we disagree fundamentally.
Okay. Ultimately, every yid is a good yid. Okay?
Every yid's a big tzaddik.
Every yid is a big tzaddik. Let's go back down to stripping it down to the core. Mm-hmm. Human beings want to be successful and want to be happy. Many other things that people want, but I think if you took, 1,000 people and said, can we agree on 2 two things that you want to be
Right.
growing up or currently. People want to be successful. People want to be happy. Problem is the perception of happiness today is not real happiness. And that brings us back to social media. You cannot tell me that you are consuming an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours of social media where you are being targeted in terms of this will make you happy and buy this and look at this and look at that, and not subconsciously say, look at all these smiling people. Look how happy they are.
Yeah.
I want that also.
Do you listen to, I think his name is Chris Williamson, the Modern Wisdom podcast?
No.
So he says he just had this guy, Arthur Brooks, on, who is sort of one of the happiness people. And he talked about all of these studies that, in terms of what social media does to your brain and how it creates that. But if that's your point, right, then isn't that the root issue?
Yes.
Right? The root issue is ultimately society.
So you're right. That is the core of the issue. The hurdle that I have in trying to create something, no one wants to have that conversation of social media until we get deeper into the weeds of the conversation of, we live in a society, we live in a city where you're set for failure. At the end of the day, everyone wants to be happy. Everyone wants to be successful. I think You
know what also I would say, and maybe this is just like, I don't know, like how many people in the yeshiva world are really not on, maybe, you know what?
Hang on.
So I was going to say, the yeshiva world, people aren't on social media. And the truth is, obviously, a lot are, because the I don't know, not so well kept secret of the yeshiva world is there's really two yeshiva worlds. There's a yeshiva world that's totally on social media and totally on smartphones, and then there's like my brother's world that's totally not, right? And actually, in my brother's world, they don't care about these things. They all make weddings at these halls in Lakewood that charge $10,000 to $20,000 for the entire wedding, and so maybe there's something to that actually.
So I think there's a large group of people who are not physically on social media, meaning they don't have the apps and they don't go on social media, but they have access to social media. And what I mean by that is when you make a party that's over the top, I don't have social media. Yeah, but the party planner who's giving you these ideas, who's feeding you these ideas, who's showing you pictures, or I don't even know how these things work.
Right.
It is from social media. Look, I have a friend who's a caterer in the city, and he was the one who told me this. And I said, where are these people getting these hasagas for bone china and these centerpieces? They're yeshivish Haredi. They don't. And he said, as much as they're not on social media, it's affecting all of us. So that is the core of the issue. The core of the issue really is social media, and this is a whole other discussion. We had it in the family once, is the internet in its core good or bad, and is social media in its core good or bad. Mm-hmm. The internet is like anything else. A gun, you can use it for good or bad. Right. I believe social media, the whole mahus, the whole purpose of social media was created not for the to'elis and the good of human beings.
Certainly what it's become, right? Like there's some, I mean, it depends how expansive you want to be, right? Like there's some element, like if you look at WhatsApp, like WhatsApp's been great for me to keep in touch with people like I grew up with who I would never have the time to call. I'm not the type of person who's good at that also, right? So longer form posts sometimes can be informative, right? But I agree. It's, with Instagram, TikTok, with the whole visual based social media, which again, like, going through like that Jonathan Haidt, idea, goes further and further down the brainstem to like our most basic sort of drivers. Yeah. That seems to really have no good purpose to it.
So to answer your question from before, I think if people are unhappy and don't equate that to, everything is rosy on the outside, right? If people are genuinely unhappy, and it doesn't mean you're a miserable person, and it doesn't mean that you're depressed.
Right.
If people inside in their kishkas are not content, are not zufrieden, then people will want to change. Now, some of the people say to me, it will only change when you hit rock bottom.
Right.
And then you will change. And maybe we're getting to rock bottom. Maybe we're far away from rock bottom. I don't think that's an excuse for not trying to sit down and have adult conversations with your friends, with your community, with Jews in the city, to say, how can we make people happier, more comfortable? I'll give you an example. Housing, which we didn't really speak about. But here's a topic that comes up when I speak to people. I worked my tail off for 10 years. I have a great job. I finally have enough money to put down on a bungalow. Cost me $1.5 million. And I still feel like I'm not giving my family what they deserve. Why? Because the norms in his community is a 4,000 square foot home. That's the goalposts.
I just want to clarify, like, I like this idea a lot, which is why I'm part of the group. Meaning I like the idea of normalization. I like the idea of, and I think it cascades. Meaning if more people have these conversations, more people are comfortable just sharing, I didn't spend this because it was stupid. I didn't spend this. My house is falling apart, but I'm okay because you know what? It's not really that important. Yes, that changes things, right? That changes the conversation. But it really requires a person to say that. It requires a person to say to themselves, each individual person has to stand up and say to themselves, to their children, to their wife, and wife to husband, whoever, has the initiative, like, we're going to be happy with this. We're going to be happy in this place. And we're going to speak about being happy in this place. And when people start talking about their houses, right? Like, we have friends who moved to Englewood recently, and they moved. I can't say where they moved from because I give away who they are. But they moved from an out-of-town place to Englewood, right? And they're sitting around at a Shabbos meal, and they're building a house, and the other people are building houses, and the people are talking about how many laundry rooms you put in your house, right? And this friend of mine, it doesn't miss a beat, is like, they like turn to them like, well, how many laundry rooms did you put in? He's like, we put in 3. But maybe it should be 4 now that we're thinking about it, right? And they go, yeah, that's really good. He's like, you know what? 5. 5 sounds like the right number. And he had people at this. Like, they did not realize that he was joking. It's that conversation coming up and being like, yeah, that's ridiculous to us, right? We really think it's ridiculous to have more than one laundry room, right?
But most people don't have the tools or want to start up in terms of opening up. So an organization, a group, a grassroots movement that brings this to the forefront. And you're 100% right. This isn't a movement where 2 Askanim or 5 guys and a group of people are going to change something.
Quite the opposite. The Askanim are not where you're going, right?
Correct.
They're in some ways, I want to say they're part of the problem because maybe they do good work, but you're not going for that. You're saying that at the end of the day, reality changes when people change. I heard a really interesting, do you know this guy, Yehoshua Pfeffer? Have you ever heard him? He's like, I would say like the thoughtful, intellectual spokesperson of the Haredi community in many ways. And he was on, I think it was Tikva's podcast, but he was on a podcast about the Haredi draft issue. And he said that people misunderstand the Haredi community. They think the leaders determine what policy is for the Haredi community. But it's actually not true, right? The leaders are as much reactive to the people, right? And he gave some good examples. He said, first of all, smartphones and the internet. He's like, it's us, or everyone says us, or, at least half the Haredi community, if not more, actually have smartphones and the internet, right? If you remember, recently, they had this whole shidduch thing, right? We're going to solve the shidduch prices. Chiyuv and takanos. Everyone's making takanos. Nobody should start dating. I don't remember exactly what it was, right? But boys shouldn't date until they're 24, and girls should date, right? And we're going to, the math works out, and we're going to solve the problem. I don't know a single person who's actually listened to that, right? And he said that the same with the army issue, that actually the issue is going to be solved when it's out of the political conversation, and it's out of a leadership conversation, and it's just individual young men deciding, you know what, I want to do this. I want to go to the army. I want to do it. And that's effectively what you're arguing, right? That at the end of the day, the issue actually gets solved when enough individual people just decide, I've decided this is stupid and I'm okay talking about it.
Right. The other issue is for us, we're 40, 50-year-old. We have what we grew up with, for the most part, and the reality today. For the next generation, this is their normal. And this is part of the conversation in terms of we've now given the next generation, it's normal to go on Pesach programs. It's normal to live in a 4,000 square foot house. It's normal to go to $11,000 traveling camp. And it all comes from a good place. We want to give. We want our kids to be happy. But ultimately, that chain won't be able to continue.
You know, you just gave me an interesting idea, because I actually think it's that generation that would have more success changing than our generation. Meaning, we all reject something of our parents' values.
Interesting,
right?
Interesting,
right? Like you know, we could look at it like our parents were not invested enough in our happiness, and so we've gone crazy, and all we care about is our children's happiness, right? Like, I actually think the next generation could have an easier time saying, you know what, I actually don't need this.
Right, I've experienced it all. I'm good to go.
Or in the end, I just see what it's done to you.
Right.
I see how it's made you crazy. I see your hypocrisy.
Interesting.
That's the gift of youth, is the ability to spot hypocrisy, right? And then to do something about it, to make sort of that generational decision.
That. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, listen, ultimately it starts with conversation. And I know a lot of pushback that I've gotten is, it's great to talk. Oh, and you're just talking, you've just met. A big piece of this, in other words, we have a 3-step program that we've put on paper. You're never going to get to step 2, and you're never going to get to step 3 if you don't spend enough time.
You want to talk about like what the 3 steps are?
Yes. So in terms of trying to make change, awareness, right? If you're not aware of the problem, can't fix it. Financial literacy, which is not my strong suit, but it's interesting to hear people who say, I would love to be a little bit more financially literate. I'd love to sit with someone. And there are organizations now, Living Smarter Jewish.
There's a lot out there.
We spoke with RSK out of the States, which will come and help you in terms of that. And then once there is awareness and a path and a plan and an understanding, then you can make real change at the end of the day. So the question is, how long do you spend on step 1? And to me, the answer is you spend as much time as you need on step 1 until people have bought in and are ready to go to step 2 and step 3. So where some may say these guys are wasting their time, they're just sitting around and talking. If you're not going to sit around and talk, and if you're not going to somehow bring it to the forefront and get people to speak about it, you're never going to be able to move to step 2 and 3.
And look, the depth of the challenge is that you're going up against an algorithm machine that is built to enhance the shallowest and most basic human instincts, right? And so you're actually, you're asking in a time where it seems so hard to do this, you're asking people to transcend it. But if I wanted to be hopeful and be optimistic, which is not my natural tendency, if I wanted to be hopeful and optimistic, I would say that I remember having a conversation with someone about texting communications early on, and she said to me, she thinks our kids are going to look at us texting all the time and be like, why don't you just pick up the phone and talk to someone, right? If I wanted to be hopeful, I would say our children might actually come to realize, the pendulum might swing back, where we've gone so far down the brainstem where someone actually remembers their higher order thinking skills and is like, this is just stupid. Why are we doing this?
Yeah, I agree.
All right, should we wrap it up?
Sure.
All right, this was fun.
Excellent.
Thanks. Menachem.
Shkoyach.
Bye.